Today, he is present here today as a fellow of achieving cost efficiency. Please welcome Honorable Ravi Karunanayake.
Firstly, I must thank the organizing committee and Chairman Mr. Vatavada for inviting me here today to speak a few words on this very important occasion. I hope you won't repent for inviting me here today, because I, as an accountant, thought of increasing the tempo and tell certain home truths as an accountant and the role that we have played and not have played. I'm further motivated with Mr. Gunasekaar being here, because he's a person who champions the cause of good governance, especially chairing the Committee of Public Enterprise in a non-political manner, giving us the opportunity to come out with certain things which he himself believes in. And I thought that was useful because he can balance the difference between the government and the opposition. I'm also caught up between two leftist politicians as a middle-of-the-road politician, where the leftists live on what we create. So I thought it also encourages me to say as to how important cost efficiency is in today's context. The Chartered Certified Management Accountants International Management Accounting Conference 2013 theme is not only appropriate, but it's very timely. Sustainable value creation through cost efficiency. I'm called upon to reflect the management accountant's role in achieving cost efficiency. Being a chartered management accountant, I'm proud to call myself a professional. I'm also a politician wearing the hat for 19 years. So professionals rely on facts, politicians rely on fiction. So I have to fictionalize the facts and walk through this tightrope so I don't let down the two professions that I represent. I think the best way to look at Sri Lanka's present context is to give you some practical experience that I have encountered in performing my dual role. Cost efficiency is everything. After all, in today's world where revenues go up the stairs and costs go up the escalator, the gap is widening by the day. The innocent people of the country are called upon to make good this difference. Today's economic recession is taking place all over the world, and as revenues cannot be increased easily, cost reductions become absolutely essential in order to ensure the gap is bridged. Therefore, the management accountant's role becomes inevitably important, delicate, and difficult. It's like skating on thin ice. It's worth quoting what Albert Einstein said: "The world is a dangerous place, not because of those who do evil, but because of those good and professional persons who look on and do nothing." The role of an accountant in a dynamic world is to ensure that you steer the company or the country through the difficult and turbulent times, and that is his responsibility. In short, to cut your coat according to the cloth that you have. Ironically, situation today, and I don't say this just as a Sri Lankan, but this is a fashion that is there in the South Asian region. The experts, the professionals, sometimes do not know what exactly they have got to be doing, because the decision makers use professionals in different roles. Today, the engineer's role is being called upon to be done by a doctor. The doctor is doing the role of a businessman. The businessman is doing the role of a religious dignitary. The religious dignitary is doing the role of a politician. The policeman is doing the role of a murderer. Accountant is doing the magician's role, where it is evidently exemplified through the central bank. So this is the situation that we are placed with. Now we are talking of, this is our mother Lanka. They also call it the miracle of Asia. Certainly I do believe. But whether we are the miracle of Asia or at this present moment, the blunder of Asia is left for you all to decide. But we need to be speaking frankly on today's situation. As accountants, whether we have done what is expected of us. Have we got the guts and the ability to walk the talk? That is what I want to basically mention today. I must confess, today we accountants are not living up to our expectation. The need of the management accountant is to give an unbiased professional opinion on a true representative view of the state of the health of a company or its entity. The absence of this is felt very badly today. I'm sure all of you do agree, even silently. Small companies are crashing. Financial institutions are going through difficult times. Blue chip companies are sub-optimized. State-owned enterprises are going through turbulent times. The country's economy is going through difficult times. Just like a company profit and loss account that you look at, if you analyze the country's balance sheet, we have the same thing in different contexts. Today, one of the biggest problems we have is a massive corruption which is going on. This is owing to the lack of right of information that is there. Mrs. Rita Sullivan, who is there, who lends through the Asian Development Bank, I call upon not only we as opposition today, but even if we're in government tomorrow, ensure that the money that is given to the country, that is paid not by the politicians, by the people of this country, are best used with a cost-benefit analysis. Just because there's a grandiose plan that is given does not necessarily mean that the monies are being used for the country's people that are there. So it is not trying to politicize the issue, but I think we as accountants should also ensure that there's a value for money concept that is there for the monies that we get. So likewise, the country's balance sheet, if you look at, there are many problems. Corruption is one, wrong capital investments. When you have one port, for the sake of just being political, you have 2-3 ports. You build bridges where you don't have rivers. That is one of the biggest problems in this country. Haphazard increase in recurrent costs rather than capital costs. Politicizing decision making, and the revenues earned are far from the expected actual return. Now, this is the time that the management accountants, who are professionals, must act with conscience, credibility, and without fear of failure. Let us look at the chartered accountants. I'm saying with no malice, but as an accountant, I thought this was a good opportunity, not only to tell the Sri Lankans, but my colleagues from the South Asian area. Chartered Institute of Management Accountants, Certified Management Accountants, all the bodies have failed in their professional duties. Have any of the association's office bearers come out and express their concern when a time when the country's economy is in dire straits? No, we have been studiously silent. When the central bank knowingly, wittingly misrepresents facts, conceal information, and highlighted distorted statistics for public deception, have we come out and expressed our professional view? Leave aside the politics of this. But as chartered accountants, taken the role of telling what is actually going on. Have we done this role is the problem that is there. So if you want to be having sustainable development and you want to bring cost efficiencies, you must eradicate inefficiencies that are being created, whether it is being created by politicians or whether it is from the private sector. We need to bring this into public domain. And this is why, if you look at today, the country's real balance sheet, I'm sure as professionals, accountants will have to give a disclaimer report. But is that happening? We basically applaud when things are being shown which is deceptive. So I guess that's what I thought, that it was necessary for me to reflect on the dual role that basically I'm called upon to express today. Now there are certain matters which are where the costs are controllable and uncontrollable. Surely I don't need to tell you accountants as to what is controllable and what is uncontrollable. But just for people who are non-accountants who are here, is just to say what we can control. The business direction, internal audit, number of staff, what we want to do, amount of advertising, etc. These come within the controllable areas, controllable costs. Uncontrollable costs can be man-made and God-made. Man-made would be government decisions, where my good colleague, senior minister, he's not part of the decision making, but he's in the cabinet that is there. Electricity price increases. Prices of inefficiency dubbed into the entity, and in order to ensure that you cannot get from anybody else the innocent consumers are called upon to pay. And today, Sri Lanka has one of the highest electricity prices in the world. We always create records from this type of thing, world records all over. Minimum salaries, they don't pay government servants salary increases, but they call upon the private sector to pay the price increase of salary increases owing to the wrong decisions the government made. At this moment, we as opposition also contribute. It's not only the government that is there. Sometimes the government does. The people have a right to ask. You as opposition, you stand up to the government in opposition. Yes, we do. But in today's context, where the media is muted, except for some people, some institutions like the MTV, Swarnavani Dharana that helps us, the rest of them, in today's media context, it wants to report what the government wants to hear and not what the people want to hear. And this is part of the problem. Then you basically have corruption. This is both give and a take. If there are somebody who wants to take, there is somebody who wants to give to take also. That is also part of the problem. So you cannot only blame one decision-making side. The government actions, such as the labor GSP, which I'll explain in a little time, the exchange rate fluctuations, these are mistimed, dual roles being played. Finance Ministry takes one decision, the central bank takes another decision. Between the two, we get crushed. Exporters don't know how to go forward. These are the problems that we are faced, which are uncontrollable. You can be the best management account in the world, but if you don't know what your controllable costs are, how can you address these issues? Legal systems, the judicial systems, which are well beyond the normal expectation that is there, especially in our wonder Sri Lanka. And the rest of it is uncontrollable, which is man-made, whether God-made, forced major activities, weather, etc. Now, ladies and gentlemen, why I went through this initial area of mentioning certain things was to get to the real problem that is there. I want to highlight certain matters that are there where decision-making of the government has basically contributed to increase in the cost in this country. Just before I came in, when Mr. Manan was speaking, I thought it was relevant because even in Bangladesh, when he and we were in governing, we basically had accountants in the cabinet. But Honorable New Gunasekara's government, not only that there is no accountant, there isn't even a chief clerk that is there that can think of finance, except our good friend Mr. New Gunasekara. He champions the cause. Must be because he's left thinking. He basically fights the issues, and at least his presence makes the government think before they do certain things. And I hope that we can strengthen his hand, not for too long, but certainly in the little period that they are. I'm sure even he will agree with me. And basically ensure that decision making is not for any individual political party, but for the country at large. Just let me take an example. Just take an example of the labor GSP. Now this is something in 2003. As a Minister of Trade and Commerce, I had the onerous task of dealing with the European Union in trying to project little Sri Lanka into the world. And I had the task of able to show that we had a lot of civil disturbances here, and project little Sri Lanka to say that we deserve to get the labor GSP because our private sector is resilient and they are professional and they need additional support in order to make that cutting difference between the region. And we were able to be successful in getting that in 2004, 2005. And at the time when we applied this, we had 685 garment factories. There were 458,000 workers, and our projection and our future display was accepted. But then, in years to come, we basically had going to policies taken by the government, and that's the reason I want to mention, government policy, which is uncontrollable to a private company, how it affects in cost efficiency. Now, when the private sector garment factories very ambitiously went forward and competing with other regions that didn't have the 11.5% advantage, they basically was able to be competitive compared to my friends in Bangladesh, Pakistan, India, because of the labor GSP that was there. But subsequently in year 2010-11, we basically lost this. Now losing was not because we wanted to lose, but owing to certain professional matters that were expected to be discharged by the government of Sri Lanka was not discharged. So European Union does not bestow this just for the sake of giving it. They want certain parameters maintained, and if you don't basically fulfill those aspirations, then they basically take that particular benefit away. Today, the garment factories or the garment industry going through turbulent times. The 628 factories is down to 199. 455,000 people working is down to 185,000. Simply because we are not able to realign our exchange rate. So the 11.5% benefit that we got from the labor GSP was not able to be encashed into the benefit of the country. We lose 145 billion. That is per annum, and that's no small amount. This is not a handout that is given to Sri Lanka. This is not something that you're going to pay back. It is only if good governance is in the country that is given to the private sector and any other person in this country that is working for the benefit of the country. We lost it, it's gone. I know my good friend, Mr. Gunasekara, fought valiantly because his intrinsic thinking is very much on the same basis that we got the labor GSP. But he was a minority in a majority government. So you lost that. And this is the way that you lose the sustainability of cost efficiency. Now this was one area which I thought I would address so that you know as to what the next would be. I was going to not speak of my pet subject, Sri Lankan Airlines and Mihin Air, but Mr. Mahan did mention that he was the chairman of Biman. I'm sure if the chairman of Sri Lankan Airlines knows that you're here, he'll definitely invite you to check what is the success story, because you lost by the millions, Sri Lankan Airlines lost by the billions. In year 2011, Sri Lankan Airlines lost 27 billion. That's 27,000 million rupees. In 2012, it lost 26,000 million, that's 26 billion. My colleague and chairman of the Committee of Public Enterprise was virulent on attack by saying, you decision makers are conferred with the right to run this airline, but who are you to lose the taxpayers' money for no valid return that is being obtained? So that's why with proudness I say, because he deserves that credit, he permitted us to question as to see the cost inefficiency that is attributed by a state-owned enterprise, which finally impacts on the people of the people. Because you had Sri Lankan Airlines losing that. I didn't also say the little sister company, which is the subsidiary Mihin Air, had invested 10 billion in the last 5 years and lost they invested 5 billion in the last 4 years and lost 10.8 billion. Year 2012, it had 100,000 people that flew on the airline, and if you really looked at, it lost 10,000 rupees for every passenger that flew. Now, Mr. Mahan, you can tell your wonder story to the chairman of Sri Lankan Airlines and try to see even now whether he can resurrect this company that is bleeding, which we can ill afford. Now, these are areas where decision making, your state enterprise that loses, where do you catch that up? These are the limited resources that come in from taxpayers of our country that are used not for the benefit of the country, but for the egoism of certain people of the country. Now, is that affordable in a little developing country? So how do you have the sustainable value creation? Value that we create is eroded by wrong decision making. And that is the problem we management accountants face today. Then you look at the CB. This is something which I'm sure is affecting everybody. And I'm sure the government must be thinking the opposition has been in there too long and given a very hot potato onto our hand. And today, I'm sure they regret for doing so, because every person in this country is basically faced with a 30 to 35% rate increase. Now, this is not for the sake of uncontrollable increases in cost, but it's simply because the controllable costs that are there were politicized, were used for political display at elections, and today this has snowballed to a huge deficit, and the IMF and the World Bank have said they won't be giving funding. And that's the time the government got jittery and said that we have no other way but to increase the electricity prices, and today it has been increased, which is well beyond the comprehension and acceptability for efficient running of institutions. Just for example, in 2010, the loss was 53 billion. That's 53,000 billion rupees. In year 2011, it was 98 billion, 98,000 million rupees. And in 2012, is 89 billion. Is this affordable? This is basically for the wrong decisions taken at the wrong time. Once again, the chairman of Committee of Public Enterprise knows very well as to the root causes of these huge losses that are there by the state-owned enterprise. Now, once again, any management account in the world coming to Little Wonder Sri Lanka, how can he be planning when these are external shocks that are given to companies that do their internal costings? So that's why we are called upon to have cost rationalization, cost efficiencies, but it must be within the controllable range that we can basically plan. How can somebody externally intrude into the internal affairs and we plan for these kind of things? So this is the third example which I give on the basis of wrong decision making, how it impacts accounting decision making in our companies. Likewise, you have the Southern Expressway and the Karunanayake Expressway. Why I basically mention this is today the country people are studiously silent, especially my colleagues in the accounting fraternity. Instead of coming out and telling these are what is on, there's no point basically clapping when a decision is being made which is wrong and which the entire future unborn generation needs to be paid. You look at the Karunanayake Expressway in 1999, I in Parliament had to ask a question from my dear colleague who is no more with me, Mr. Gerard Fernando Pulle. And at that time, a 24.2 kilometer expressway, the cost was 6.5 billion. And just about 8 months ago, I asked the present Minister of Road Development what the present final cost of Karunanayake Expressway would be. The cost that was mentioned was 48.5 billion. 8 times the cost in the last 11 years. Is this sustainable? 2 billion being the cost per kilometer. Is this made out of gold? Is it made out of something which is not there in the rest of the world? Now this is decision making that we will basically have to be incorporating into our accounts, which is well beyond our cost, which is well beyond our comprehension. I'm sorry. So these are matters where the costs have gone up 8 times the original cost. Is it that the inflation has gone up 8 times? Or is it the corruption that has gone up 8 times? This is the problem. Where is our professional accounting bodies coming out? You have the Road Development Authority being audited. When it came before Committee of Public Enterprise, the balance sheet opinion that was displayed was nothing else, but it only reveals, as per the accounts that is given, is it true and proper order? Is this what you expect of an accountant to give when the institution is being run to rack and ruin? The same way is for Southern Expressway. In 2003, 2004, when we were in government, we had legal battles that we have got to win through. With the help of the ADB, we were able to cost this 124 kilometer expressway for a cost of 48 billion. It was subsequently completed in 6 years thereafter with a cost 500% increase in the cost. When in 2004, when it was launched, it had a cost of 48 billion, and now the cost is 98 billion. The return or the capital amortization that was expected for the project was a 40-year return with a 6.5 billion payment a year, the revenue being 5 to 6 billion. Today the revenue is 1 billion and a deficit of 5.5 billion. Where is our colleagues in the profession which is supposed to be giving information on the viability, on the going concern concept that is there. Haven't we failed? I am saying so because I was a part of the county fraternity that is there. So let us even get up from this particular conference and here onwards, without fear of favor, come out the profession that you so loyally worked, that we need your professional judgment to ensure the unborn generation don't pay for the follies that are taking place today. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I was allocated 20 minutes and I don't want to overstep the mark because normally when politicians get the podium, they can't be easily sent off. So all I want to basically impinge upon you is to ensure that critical times need professionals to wake up. We don't want our professionals to take a Valium and sleeping just because the going is tough. When the going is tough is the time that the tough get going. And this is what I basically expect of all of you. It's not just because I'm in opposition and taking a dig at the government, because we also have been in government and been part of the problem, very small part of the problem. And I'm sure before too long, we'll be able to ameliorate these problems that are there. Hope you have the confidence and the ability in us. But all I want to do is, with the senior minister being here, to say that I don't say this with malice, but all I want to say is that we as professionals need to do a sense of professionalism that is expected of us. Let me just mention one other thing, the Petroleum Corporation, which is also something which is very concerning. Today, when the world prices are reducing, this is the one day in Asia that is increasing prices. When we can basically get petrol coming to the port of Colombo at 89 rupees, we sell it at 169 rupees. Just 3 months ago, before the electricity prices were increased, the world prices had a 23% dip, but the petrol and the furnace oil was increased by 12%. So you artificially increase your cost. And then you say that the Electricity Board is making a loss. But the Petroleum Corporation, the cash cow, that make a huge profit. Where is that benefit given to the so-called socialist government that is looking after the people? So we as management accountants that extract costings for the corporate plan for the next 4 or 5 years, how can we expect the irrational thinking of the government decision maker? So this is why I call upon that we as management accountants, as the accounting bodies, let us wake up and give a wake-up call, not only on the government, but also on the opposition and on the politicians, which I'm sure Honorable D. Gunasekharan and we would love to have that sense of challenge that is put on us. Because sometimes we give that challenge which is absent from the professionals that are there. The rest of it is that capital duplication, which is once again well beyond the normal comprehension of any of us. When you have a very sustainable port that is there, you go and build a port in somewhere that is irrational or unwanted. The cost that has got to be carried on has to be carried on by the Colombo port. Now the 6.5 billion that needs to be carried on by the Colombo port, the costings have to be taken into account from the place which basically a 68 billion investment was made. So when you bring that costings into the Colombo port costings, we become uncompetitive. We have got to compete with Singapore and we have got to compete with Fujairah on the other side, with Port Kelang in Malaysia, with Thailand competing. So if we have brought in costs that is not relevant to the port, how can we give a costing that is competitive in order to break the competition that is fiercely around us? Now these are uncontrollable costs. So as management accountant, for sustainable cost efficiency, how can we do it if it's well beyond our control? So ladies and gentlemen, it is not the time just to have just a pick at the government, but all we want to do is pick on the professionals that are here. It's a wake-up call on all of you, including me. It's not that there is no tomorrow. It's not that whether we cannot develop this country, whether we want to develop this country. It is whether we love Mother Lanka or whether we want to be silently passing by and looking at things going on rather than stand up and do the little that is expected of you. Let us get together. Together we can make that difference. And that, as accountants, we owe it to the countrymen. Thank you very much, Professor Vatawala, for inviting me to.
With value addition, you multiply the production and sales, you have to minus the cost for the intermediate inputs, and you end up with more value, more economy. This is an effective strategy where you've got an expanding economy or an expanding region. But at the moment, as we know, with this global situation, we don't really have that. And in Sri Lanka and in countries in South Asia, this is certainly a problem. So therefore, we need to move to this second strategy, that of cost efficiency. And this is where you have your value addition, but your production or sales stay flat, and you need to then push down the cost for the intermediate inputs. And this is the approach that we're talking about today, going forward. At the firm level, we know that cost cutting is inevitable. Now, how that is done, you minimise stocks, you downsize staff, you do energy audits, a whole series of measures that can be undertaken, and no doubt you are very much involved in those. At the sector level, what we're seeing is this sustainability reporting. We see this as a very important reform and measure to be undertaken, particularly the role of the accountants now needs to take this on far more strongly. And it needs to be mainstreamed along with your financial reporting. As you know, this sustainability reporting looks at the environmental impacts of your operations, the energy efficiency and waste management systems, for example, as well as your whole internal operations. We do look to use this measure, this sustainability reporting, to improve good governance, very much a mantra. Ravi's not here, but to tell him it is. Good governance is very much a mantra of ADB. We've seen recently the occupational health and safety concerns and the workplace human rights issues, particularly in Bangladesh, the unfortunate incidents there, and more recently in China. And the impact of these, the immediate impact has been for international organisations to look very seriously at their operations in the country and do they pull them out? Do they shut them down? Do they do this? These are very serious ramifications that we've seen. Also, we need to develop the human capital within the organisation. Everyone talks about it, but we know now this is a very critical component of all the operations. And what this sustainability reporting also, not simply looking at the organisation, but it looks as to how the organisation fits within the local community and how it impacts with all the stakeholders. And we see this has very immediate benefit to all the parties and hopefully encourages brand loyalty. So everyone's involved and at various different levels. Let's look at the government, as we've heard. Better infrastructure is a critical part of it for the government to give an enabling environment for the private sector to be able to come in and move forward with their operations. Government needs to impose governance standards both on itself and on the corporations operating within its jurisdictions. Needs to have a strong legal system, strong policies, regulation and administrative frameworks. The private sector, very important in this whole matrix. They have to come in and provide investment to complement the government initiatives. And where does ADB stand amongst this? We support both the government and the private sector to help sustain your operation.